Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Kavat. Days before the Australian Prime Minister heads to China this weekend, we look at the strengthening of a new era of U.S. Australia strategic cooperation, cemented by Anthony Albanese's state visit to Washington. With me to discuss this are Lai I-Chung, president of Taiwan think tank the Prospect Foundation, and Alexander Huang, Kuomintang International Affairs Director and representative to the U.S. President Lai, Alexander, warm welcome to the show today. President Lai, U.S. President Joe Biden says the U.S. Australia alliance is now more critical than ever.
I would say this summit is more about Australia rather than the United States. First of all, this is not the first time the Prime Minister Albanese visited the United States, and this is not the first time the summit has been held. But the way the Prime Minister Albanese arranged his overseas visit, first to the United States and then to China, that apparently signifies where he wanted to prioritize. The U.S. is Australia's an ally partner, and China is basically the country they need to stabilize the relationship with. So the priority apparently has been very much evident in this selection. But I will also say that this is also the time that Australia, especially right after this April, they publicized their defense strategic review, in which not only about the submarine deal that will be implemented in greater detail, but also Australia fundamentally restructure its forces and its defense postures. So that this time the Australia's visit to the United States apparently has something to do with that implemented and improvised defense strategic review about how the Australia and the United States will be able to work together under this framework.
Alexander, Albanese seemed to have a few messages in his speeches. Let's have a look at the one where he invoked John F. Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said this at a speech at the U.S. State Department. He said, "As a constructive middle power with global interests, we, Australia, understand the value and importance of dialogue. As former U.S. President John F. Kennedy proved 60 years ago during the Cuban crisis, the true measure of a superpower strength is the ability to pull the world back from the brink of conflict. Once again, that has become the test of our time. China has been explicit. It does not see itself as a status quo power. It seeks a region and a world that is much more accommodating of its values and interests." Alexander, so tell me, what do you think the messages are to the U.S. and China?
I think the message that Prime Minister Albanese revealed or stated when he visited the United States is actually a textbook maneuver of what we traditionally call middle power. For Australian interest, the least thing that they want to see is a conflict in the Indo-Pacific region. Number two is that it seems to me that he sensed, number one, they will have a strategic adjustment. Number two, they will reorganize or restructure their armed forces. Number three, given their population is on the rise, I think he expected that a greater role and influence of Australia that can be played in Indo-Pacific region. Of course, number four is that I think he sensed that Australia needs to buy time to fulfill all these growth and all this planning. Don't forget the nuclear submarine program will take probably more time to be realized.
Okay. Well, because of the issues in the U.S. Congress,
or it's the complication of itself. I mean, building a nuclear sub is in itself is very difficult and takes time.
Also, in that quote from Albanese, in referencing the Cuban Missile Crisis, was there a message about dialogue to China?
Well, I think
maybe fill us in about what happened during the Cuban crisis.
Right. You know, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 1960s, that the United States had tested and its will and play a mind game with the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. And finally, both sides had a kind of ration to resolve that issue peacefully. I think Prime Minister Albanese's message is very clear, that big powers comes with bigger responsibility, and maintaining peace and stability and pull all the dangers away and pull the peace back is very important. Maybe Prime Minister sense that we have continued heat up in the Indo-Pacific region that need to be cooled down. And he reminded not only Washington, but also Beijing that you guys have responsibility and you have to do it.
Okay, so President Lai, just picking up the strategic shifts and the middle power agency of Australia, do you believe that they do have a big role to play?
I think if you look at an Albanese, his statement, he talks about that how Australia is a middle power with a global ambition, which means that Australia, despite its national strength, has its plan about how the global order should be, and wanted to work with partners to implement that vision. I think in Australia's view, it seems that they really want to focus not just about the periphery, about the Australian border, but also the wider region, including in Southeast Asia as well as in the Pacific and island regions. And so that's why in this statement, I believe it is Australia's and probably also with the United States consent that they put the Pacific island in such a front and center positions and spend a lot of volume elaborating how the two countries will work on this. Another issue I think Australia also like to put front and center, in which the United States also has a consent, but probably not as prioritizing as the Australia is about the climate change issues. And I think the leadership statement by both countries, I will look at the Pacific Islands engagement as well as a focus on the climate change as probably, in addition to the military part, are the two most important issues that they like to highlight to the whole world.
Okay. President Lai, Albanese will be the first Australian Prime Minister in 7 years to visit China. Let's take a look at what he said about his upcoming trip.
This will be an important visit. It will mark 50 years, almost to the day, when Gough Whitlam made his important visit to China, the first visit by an Australian Prime Minister to the People's Republic of China. It is important that we stabilise our relationship with China. That is in the interests of Australia and China, and it is indeed in the interests of the world.
So Beijing has agreed to review tariffs that it levied on Australian wine since 2020. In return, Australia has suspended its complaint against China to the World Trade Organization. So President Lai, where do you see the Australia-China relationship going?
To Australia itself, that in 7 years the Prime Minister visit to China, no matter where you look at it, it's a big deal. Apparently, as long with a summit visit, they will come with the issue that can be addressed or be solved, or the even agreement they wanted to move forward. But I think that right now the Australia's main focus will be to stabilize the Australia and China relationship.
Many people said China was using coercion against Australia because of many things. They didn't like Australia's calling for the investigation into COVID origins, for example. It's now easing that coercion, you know, those tariffs, those sanctions. Does that mean now that Australia, in order to stabilize, should be maybe sidestepping some of the issues that are sensitive to China? Does it mean that it will be more likely to do its bidding?
The speculation is always there. How Australia is going to, how Australia intending to make some concession in order to get what the Chinese would like to lower the tariff against Australia. But there are also some other people, they argue that China after imposing a sanction on Australia, found out that itself is also become a victim of its own sanction, and such as the coal from Australia. And several years ago, it caused the Chinese energy crisis. And the lobsters, what it turned out is that China continued to demand the lobster from Australia, but they cannot get it from the official market.
And Alexander, so in terms of Australia, what it said in the Washington trip, what Albanese said in terms of middle powers, all the international community having responsibility to maintain the peace and deter aggression. How do you think it can act in that light as Albanese prepares to go to China?
Well, I think his trip itself has a pretty high value, because it's only about 3 weeks, after his official trip to the United States. If we look at the U.S. Australian official statement or joint statement, it's rather comprehensive, from strategic to environmental to infrastructure. But the Australian-China talks, we will have to hold our breath and see what's the deliverables and what's the outcome of that visit. But it seems to me that it's all focused on trade and a better working relationship. As the Prime Minister himself said, it's to stabilize the relationship.
So he won't be talking about peace in the Taiwan Strait?
Right. The key words, I think he suggested that there have been problems, that they do not expect to resolve all the problems, but they want to lower the temperature and stabilize the situation.
Okay, thank you. Now, under their partnership, the U.S. and Australian leaders announced a trilateral project between the U.S., Australia and Japan to produce next-generation drones. My next guest is Stephen Nagy, Japan Institute of International Affairs visiting fellow, who explains why drones are being targeted by these allies to counter China. I spoke to him earlier.
Countries like Japan and the United States and Australia have watched what's happened in Ukraine and watched how the Ukrainians have deployed drones quite effectively to deal with the Russian aggression in the region, and understood that this is the next area of warfare that they're going to need to deal with. Of course, we've seen drones also be used in Israel with the recent Hamas attack, and there is real concern that China would use these kind of tactics across the Taiwan Strait to at least confuse the Taiwanese defense systems or create the kind of chaos that would make it much more difficult to defend Taiwan. So they see this as a real critical tool moving forward to try and create more deterrence. But also perhaps use these collaborative drone systems in offensive capabilities to deal with some of the quantitative advantages that have emerged as China has spent 10% year on year in terms of increases in military budgets since 2000. And
so they're sort of unmanned, they're cheaper, they're incredibly fast and flexible. What stake does each party hold in this trilateral cooperation? What do they bring to the partnership?
Well, I think the stakes are quite interesting. There's the technology side, so the countries that are pushing the envelope in terms of technological development, in terms of drones, will eventually be able to monetize this. So I think this is a clear and important approach. So the United States wants to be out there. Japan, with its manufacturing and technological capabilities, is there, and it wants to be part of these advantages. And of course, Australia wants to be part of this because they see economic advantage. But they also see this as a huge ability to a huge potential to deal with, I think, again, that quantitative advantage that China has developed over the past 20 years in terms of investing very narrowly in its naval and other capabilities that are meant to be for Taiwan in the case of some kind of forced reunification. So they see that this is particularly important to, again, build the capabilities to create the deterrence they need. And I think for the United States, Australia, that are far from the region, this is an economical way to enhance the deterrence. From Japan's point of view, of course, they're in the front line of Taiwan's security challenges, and we should be clear about that. They see this as a very, very important point area to invest in for Taiwan's security and peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits, but of course for Japan in terms of pushing back against Chinese aggression.
That was Asian expert Stephen Nagy speaking to me earlier. Alexander, let me come to you. So the South China Morning Post reports that China has reduced the cost of drones down to military drones, down to a fifth of the international price. Now this comes on the back of the U.S. mass drone project Replicator, and that's to create thousands of drones over the next 2 years. So are we seeing a new drones arms race?
It's not only an arms race. I think it's recognition of the functions and the utilities that yet to be fully exploited, that drones that will play a major role in the future conflict. You know, it's a dual-use vehicle that many countries will find new ways and cheaper ways to massive production of drones. So I believe that this is a competition. We will see it more. I cannot say it's a game changer for future conflict, but drones will be a key instrument in the future military operations for sure.
President Lai, so to deter or to compete with China, the U.S. must produce in quantity because China has that quantity. But now what we're seeing is the allied partnerships producing drones. Actually, Japan had already announced that it was going to be producing drones with the U.S. in December. So are we seeing very much that in order to deter China, the U.S. must ally with its partners in order to do this?
Well, I was saying this way, that the drone usually, especially military drone, right now we are talking about kind of two types of military drones. One of them is more expensive, have a longer, can fly much higher and stay longer, and have more firepower should the drone armed with the lethal weapons. Another is a drone that frequently right now being used in Ukraine warfare. That is very expendable, very cheap, but you will, whenever you achieve the results, will probably will just crash. And according to the experience in the war in Ukraine, that the survivability of those cheap drones probably this drone for the repeated mission, and after the 3 missions, this drone will be destroyed. And I think China is very dominant in those very cheap drones. The more expensive drones, I do not think that China is able to dominate in the market.
So the issue, the U.S.'s collaborative combat aircraft, that's their one, the higher end that you say, longer range.
Yeah, because the cheaper drone definitely that needs to be produced, and because it is so expendable. But I do not know whether that the United States, working with Japan, for example, in this announcement, are the cheap drones that they want to produce. But apparently, that due to Japan its own constitutional constraints, probably they cannot produce jointly with the United States for exclusively military drones that are used for the combat. But for the drone that could have a dual use, whether that's it should be a civilian usage, but that can quickly transform to the military should the things go south. That could be the drone that Japan can produce.
Right, yeah, because he's an expert in AI, artificial intelligence, and robotics as well, so we expect them to be quite advanced. Alexander, President Lai mentioned, Australia's wanting to prioritize and to emphasize the Pacific Islands in its partnership with the United States. So what we heard, one of the announcements is $65 million to essentially build internet cables connecting a number of Pacific Islands, but mostly Fiji and French Polynesia. So all the way from the US to Australia, but through the Pacific Islands. Tell me, is this project about national security?
Of course. I think I cannot say it's too little too late, but we have to recognize that before the past several years, for quite a long time, that Australia did not, or I should say overlooked the importance of the Pacific Islands to its security. Of course, Australia is a superpower in South Pacific, but now they realize that competition between the United States and China will be expanded to South Pacific, and Australia has a vital interest to keep those Pacific islands within the peripheral of their influence. So investment, encouragement, and more assistance, both in civilian infrastructure and even security assistance is expected.
And what we're talking about here, President Lai, is perhaps to ensure that these Pacific islands don't get tied to Huawei cables, Chinese Huawei cables.
Yeah, definitely. Because there are already several cases like China proposed either to the Solomon Island and others about the constructing the maritime submarine cables linking some of the islands. So this project definitely is something that the United States wanted to construct and to reconnect with the Pacific Islands to prevent those areas from falling into Chinese hands, or at least they could dilute Chinese influence over that region. And interesting enough is that those cables coming from the United States, at the same time when the cable connect those islands, definitely there will be the receiving end to be constructed in those islands. How that infrastructure will introduce the opportunity for the United States as well as Australia's for the working relationship with those islands, that will be another very interesting development.
Alexandra, as well as all those opportunities and avoiding sort of having Huawei cables instead of Google, these are Google cables, there's also the global data side of things, isn't it? So avoiding being a part of China's global data collection.
Oh yeah, of course. No matter is submarine cable or other communication stations, for military, it's all related to reconnaissance and sensors. They are the sensors. Of course, the United States specifically would be very vigilant about the usage or the purpose of those sensors. Not forget, it's only profit and jobs. And so I think it's a combination of interest that the United States, even though it's far away from Hawaii or from the continental U.S., but the geostrategic location of Pacific Islands are becoming more and more critical in watching the ever expansion of the Chinese influence, if not force.
And President Lai, if we can briefly touch on the Taiwan cables. So Google's also building 4 undersea cables to connect Taiwan to the world. There's, one which is connecting Taiwan and Japan, and then another one which is Hong Kong, Taiwan, the Philippines, and the U.S.
Well, if you look at the Taiwan's cable and on north end and south end combined, we have like 26 cable in total, and mostly those cable they will go to Japan, whether they go to the Okinawa or directly go to Japan. And the south, some of them they directly have to go through the Philippines or to Vietnam. Some of them actually went to the some of them actually go to the Hong Kong. So those are the known locations that the connecting points that we have, and so the Google basically follow the already routine that they have.
Okay. Now, Alexander, we mentioned, you mentioned, I think, critical infrastructure in terms of military infrastructure. Part of the announcement was to the rebuilding of 2 wharfs in Kiribati. Tell us why these 2 in particular are significant.
I mean, in peacetime, of course, they encourage tourism or better transportation, a bigger capacity, or frequent usage that can bring more vibrant development of the local economy. But during wartime, I think it fits into the urgent deployment of the American assets as well. So since China is focusing on the airstrip, the United States are now looking at the maritime access. You know, if we zoom in, it is a picture of strategic competition over a tiny island.
President Lai, it's just 2,000 kilometers from Hawaii, as Alexander said, very strategic. And he also mentioned that China is looking to revive that World War II airstrip. There's also been, you know, talk of the White House wanting to bring the Pacific Islands into the Quad itself. What do you think of that?
Well, let's see that because the bring the Pacific Island into the Quad itself, usually in terms of the Quad Plus. So U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. Plus, in certain projects will include some other countries in the mix. So let's see that what kind of the project that the in Pacific Island will be brought into the Quad dominated project.
Okay, well, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, President Lai I-Chung and Alexander Huang. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.